Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Not all meals are created equal. For instance, breakfast has the spicy egg McMuffin for a limited time, and lunch doesn't. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Burma had been conquered from the north, a feat never before accomplished in history, and one worthy to rank with the most splendid of military achievements. The task laid upon Mountbatten and his allied commanders of all services had been discharged with greatly inferior resources and had been deemed necessary by the chiefs of staff and Mountbatten himself only a few months earlier. The frontiers of India were safe. The road to China had been opened and secured. 4/5 of Burma had been freed. The shield of Japan's conquests in Southeast Asia had been battered down. The road to Singapore lay open. And that was from The Campaign in Burma, one of the HMSO, His Majesty's Stationery Office, pamphlets prepared for Southeast Asia Command by the Central Office of Information.
Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and James Holland and Jim. So, will they get to Rangoon before the monsoon? Which
sounds like a poem, doesn't it?
Has a ring. What's quite clear is that Slim's army is firing on all cylinders, isn't it? And
it's a honed machine now.
Yeah. And, such a far cry from...
Arakan, January 1943. Yeah.
Yeah, even 2 years previously. It's quite extraordinary, the turnaround. And he doesn't stint in praising his subordinates.
No, he never puts the praise on himself. He makes it absolutely clear that it's his junior commanders, the men, they deserve all the praise. And he says, towards a highly skilled, experienced and resolute commander controlling a hard-fought battle is to see not only a man triumphing over the highest mental and physical stress, but an artist producing his effects in the most complicated and difficult of the arts.
And that's him talking about Punch Cowan, of course. Slim is very good at being modest, isn't he? And delivering praise down, isn't he? But he's also, got to deal with the people above him. But this is operational art at its sort of most complex, isn't it?
Well, yes, and perfected, I would say. We can go... It was amazing what Patton did to get across the Rhine and the fact that he's training beforehand and organising all his boats and all the rest of it. Yeah, but, Patton schmatten compared to this, frankly. I mean, this is of an entirely different order. The kind of make, do and mend stuff, the kind of having to make 540 riverboats in situ on the Irrawaddy. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. And of course, it is the marriage of the ground forces, logistics, engineers with air power that really is the key to this. But it's also having the vision to understand how you can get air power to work with your ground forces in the first place. And that's the thing that he's honing back end of 1943 and into the beginning of 1944. Win air superiority, own the airspace, get your guys on the ground to advance, clear spaces in the jungle, create landing strips where Dakotas can land or Piper Cubs or whatever they are, and this is making a huge difference. So, during Operation Extended Capital, the operation to take Mandalay and McTeela, Allied air forces are flying 7,000 sorties by day. And by April 1945, 90% of 14th Army supplies are coming in by air.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's amazing. What I think is really, really interesting is there's always been this thing that Burma is just a British show, Americans aren't involved, and all the rest of it.
No.
That's just to completely discount the huge contribution by the United States on this. And even after Wiedemeyer has taken away 75 planes in December, you remember they get most, Mountbatten gets 50 of those back. Then Hap Arnold, who is the commander-in-chief of the US Army Air Force back in Washington, he then says, okay, I understand why this is so important. I'm going to give you a further 145 transports. So, 75% of the 88,500 tons that reached 14th Army during this operation, just in March alone, comes from the US AAF.
Yeah.
That is a substantial contribution.
And there's a large Chinese faction in this fighting under Stilwell.
Yep.
And, 14th Army, let's not make any bones about this. We keep saying British. It's the Indian Army.
Yeah.
And it's Indian and West African soldiers.
And East African soldiers.
And
And Gurkhas and Nepalese.
Exactly. And in fact, 14th Army is is it 80% non-British?
Not in terms of fighting troops, but it is in terms of overall footfall.
Well, but we're talking about the effect of overall footfall here, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Without logistic business, guys on the railway, stevedores, people loading and unloading, packing, moving, building railways, building roads. That is, maybe it's not the sharp end, but it's this completely pan-allied effort. And in a British imperial effort is the truth.
Yes, I would say in sort of fighting troops, it's probably about 35% British.
Yeah, but they aren't able to do any of the fighting without all these other people contributing. And I think that's what's really interesting is this is coalition warfare in its purest essence, isn't it? Dealing with the Chinese means that there are political issues with the Chinese. I mean, Stilwell's men, Chinese troops, are not necessarily affected by this in terms of their morale and their attitude, but there are political shenanigans going on, aren't there?
Well, yes, because Chiang is insitting all the Chinese troops that were in the NCAC. They're withdrawn back into China, and they're immediately flown out by the US 10th Air Force. Well, that obviously means aircraft and all the rest of it. So, Slim just goes straight to Mountbatten when he hears this, kind of bypassing Lease. And Mountbatten then appeals to Churchill, who then turns to Marshall. And Marshall agrees that the US transport should not be withdrawn until the 1st of June or the fall of Rangoon, whichever comes first. So that's that sorted out. But it's another kind of hassle. There's then a big spat between Chiang and Mountbatten, who've kind of sort of completely fallen out, as everyone falls out with Chiang because he's such a total arsehole.
Yeah. Well, and on an extremely sticky wicket. It does raise a question. What on earth is Lease doing with his time?
Well, he's feeling redundant. This is a problem, and this is going to brew up trouble for later. He wants to. He's got a massive ego. He's coming with a massive superiority chip. We'll show these sort of these backwater people to how we do things in the real theatre of war over in the Mediterranean and Italy. I'll show them what to do, and he's kind of sorely disabused of that. But he doesn't have the wit or the humility to recognise that actually he's a step out of time, and that actually his inverted commas modern European fighting ways are out of touch with what's going on in Southeast Asia. And he doesn't make any effort to try and get his head around that. And his ego won't allow him to kind of, how can I help you? It's clear that you've got this under wraps. So he's just not that kind of person. And, again, it just underlines what a sort of terrible decision it was. But anyway, I mean, Slim's big problem is that casualties in the 14th Army for the whole of extended capital have been comparatively slight, 10,000 in total, which are vast number are disease again, but he only has 5 divisions because 56th Division is still up in the northeast. 2nd British Division needs a rest and being pulled out. And it's possible that even once they've kind of regrouped, that the Japanese might have local superiority. So it's not a total slam dunk that they're going to just whip their way straight down to Rangoon and kind of overrun the whole of the country. There's still quite a big challenge ahead. And, it's really, really important to understand that, the distances involved. You're talking about another 350 miles from Mktila to Rangoon. That's a big distance in this landscape. This is all kind of quite challenging. And we all know that the Japanese don't like surrendering. So the idea that this is now going to be a cakewalk is not on anyone's mind. But it's interesting, I think, to think about what the Japanese are doing, because, clearly their strategy is in complete ruins. Their whole point was that they were supposed to hold the central part of Burma. But, they've lost that. And in 3 weeks of operations after the fall of Mandalay, Douglas Gracie's 20th Division have cleared 45 miles by 40 and hold a 50-mile stretch of the Rangoon-Mandalay Railway, with another couple of thousand of Japanese dead and another 50 guns gone, which 50 guns doesn't sound very much, but it is in this theatre. That's the point. The numbers that we're used to talking about Europe are not the same as they are here. And, early April, 2nd Division, before they go back to India, and 20th Division kind of link up. And, now the whole of northern and central Burma is in Allied hands. Kimura's lost that battle for central Burma. But what he is thinking is, okay, let's move down to another defensive line and let's try and hold the Allies until the monsoon comes in early May. And, if we do that, then, then that might give us a chance to have some reinforcements and maybe we can counterattack and all that. I mean, it's delusional claptrap. I mean, it's just bonkers. It reminds me of Kesselring sort of thinking, well, if we can just kick the Allies back into Sea at Anzio, then we can do a counter punch and push them back, the Gustav line, and maybe we'll take all of Italy. I mean, it is absolutely total fantasy. Kimura has used all his reserves in the Mictila battle. All his remaining divisions are at half strength or less. Most of his motor transport's gone. Most of his artillery's gone. So, he's still got his base troops and everything, but, he's not got much. So he orders the remnants of 15th Army to head for Taungu, which is 250 miles south of Mandalay and 125 miles northeast of Rangoon. And the railway runs from kind of Mandalay down to Mictila, down to Taungu in a kind of roughly straight north-south line. And then about 75 miles west of that, also running pretty much in a straight north to south line, is the Irrawaddy Valley. But the main rail link is not on the Irrawaddy Valley. It's kind of further east than that. And so parallel with Taungu is Prome, and that is on the Irrawaddy. So, what he hopes to do is create a kind of defensive line that roughly runs parallel from the coast across the hills south of the Arakan to Prome, then across the Irrawaddy and across to the Taungu. And he's assuming that these kind of main arteries, these main axes, these lines of communication are going to be the main defensive positions. And, he's also got the 28th Army, which has been in the Arakan battles. Again, also really badly hammered and under strength, but not as under strength as the Japanese 15th Army. So they're going to hold Prome and the Irrawaddy Valley, while the remnants of 15th Army are told to hold Taungu. And General Sakurai, who's the 28th Army commander, he's told to try and keep the Brits north of Prome, which will give a bit of time for 54th Division to withdraw from the southern Arakan, where they've been fighting British 15th Corps and 26th Indian Division, 24th Indian Division, 25th rather, and the commandos and so on. But for Slim, clearly, the sights now are firmly on Rangoon, but he's got, let's say, best part of 350 miles.
And the deadline of the monsoon. So just as Kimura's relying on the monsoon to rescue him, and Slim is thinking, well, it might rescue the Japanese, right? I've got to get on with it, not give them the chance to solidify. Because this is the nature of the campaigning in Burma, is you're sort of kind of put on hold, particularly as Slim is further and further and further into Burma and his supply lines are getting longer and longer and longer. The monsoon is going to generate far more friction the further he gets from India, essentially. So he doesn't want that to get in his way, does he? So he's got to crack on.
Yeah, exactly.
Slim's plan, as he sees it, time is running out, is to get Frank Messafy, who's 4 Corps commanders.
Great friend of the show.
He's not wearing his pajamas on this occasion.
No, but he is wearing a slouch cap.
Oh, fantastic. Slim wants him to use a strike force led by 4 Corps, but also detach another back across the Irrawaddy to head south towards Prome. So in other words, to divide what he's got and shuffle things around and crack on towards the railway line that goes to Rangoon. So all roads lead to Rangoon and you're going to have to seize them. That the Japanese are using these roads, banking on these roads as defensive positions, is going to rather feed them into what Slim has planned, right?
Well, exactly. So you've basically got these two corridors. You've got the Irrawaddy Valley, and they're running north-south, and they're parallel to one each other, separated by 75, 80 miles, something like that. On the western side, on the right-hand side, where it was 4th Corps doing the right hook, it is now going to put Montague Stomford's 33rd Corps going down the Irrawaddy Valley, whereas now 4th Corps, which was on the right, is now going to be on the left, going down Mictila, Taungu, down the railway line route. That's basically how it's working. There's a bit of a sort of shuffle of divisions. So Gracie's 20th Division stays in 33rd Corps, but they're now joined by the 7th Golden Arrow Division.
Yep.
19th Division, Pete Reese, which was obviously in 33 Corps, is now in Messavy's 4th Corps.
Right.
There's also a few little tensions between Stopford and Slim because it's now clear that Messervy's Fourth Corps is the vanguard for the drive on Rangoon. And earlier Slim had said, stop, Monty, I think, Rangoon's going to be yours. And these things are quite important. And one of the reasons why there's this slight sort of tension between Slim and Stopford is because one of Stopford's staff appealed directly to Mountbatten that the Corps was being starved of supplies. And so Slim summoned Stopford to Began for a bit of a dressing down. And Stopford says, look, this guy obviously has a direct in to Mountbatten. This is nothing to do with me. And they're kind of, it's fine. They smooth it over. And frankly, in this incredibly testing time, despite all their successes, if that's the limit of the problems they've got, they're not huge. So I think, you don't want to kind of overcook the disharmony. I think for the most part, 14th Army is operating as an extremely well-oiled machine.
Yeah. Well, and there's disharmony to come at a higher level anyway.
Yes.
This level, it's ticking over nicely.
Yep.
Now, I think what's interesting here, though, because obviously Mountbatten's an amphibious combined operations specialist, isn't it? So he's going to want to land some people in some landing craft, isn't he? I mean, he's just it. He's a naval guy. He's itching for it, right?
Okay, so there's two schools of thought on this. So there's one school of thought, which is that Mountbatten is a kind of sort of narcissistic prima donna. He's jealous of Slim. He doesn't want Slim getting all the glory. And he's damned if it's going to be 14th Army that's going to get to Rangoon. He's going to spoil it with an amphibious operation, which will claim it. The alternative view is that actually Mountbatten and Slim have always got on very well, and there is no evidence, again, to suggest that they haven't at any point, pretty much. And the Mountbatten is there as an amphibious combined operations amphibious guy. That's the reason why he's sent to be Supreme Allied Commander in the first place. And that if you can get to Rangoon as quickly as you possibly can with an amphibious operation, why wouldn't you do that? And I fall very much into the latter camp, I have to say. I
couldn't tell that from your tone, Jim.
Yeah, I know, you never know, would you? But historians are always so keen to kind of pick up on the disharmony and the discord, and there's a tremendously it's Frank McLynn, who's a sort of journo historian who's written a book. He's written all sorts of very diverse things, and including a history of Burma. But he's really got it in for Mountbatten, and it's so based on his own personal prejudice. It's just you can't take it seriously.
Yes, a lot of this is people thrashing out what the best way of approaching things is, right?
It's not about who gets there first. It's about winning the war in Burma. Mountbatten's got amphibious operations. He's got 15th Corps, which have been detached from 14th Corps, who have won the battle in the Araucana and now kind of sort of, not really doing a huge amount. 14th Army have had this tremendous battle and they're absolutely exhausted. And you've got shipping and you've got landing craft, got air power. Why wouldn't you use that? The point is to win the war as quickly as possible. So I refute the kind of it's all Mountbatten being a prima donna thing.
Yeah, but so what we're talking about is Operation Dracula. We talked about previously. And the idea is to an amphibious landing that will land at Rangoon, and therefore you get there quicker, don't you? You're there instantly, aren't you?
Sounds like a really good idea to me.
And Slim's actually in favour of this sort of, because Dracula coordinated with what he's doing is a far better prospect, isn't it? And he's worried that Kimura's going to pack the city with suicide squads and hold out until the monsoon. So, the more the merrier. If you've got, and again, so much of the way things are being done in Burma are hammer and anvil, isn't it? You make the Japanese the meat and the sandwich, to mix my metaphors, don't you? And this will do that. This will offer that.
Yeah. Exactly that.
And obviously, once you've taken Rangoon, from the British perspective, strategically, you can then go to Malaya more easily. You've cleared the coast and you set yourself up for that.
Yes, and obviously what you want to do is you want to clear as much of Burma of the Japanese as quickly as possible with the monsoon hovering over you. So I think the thing that is pressing Slim and his drive southwards is not that Mountbatten might take the glory for taking Rangoon. He is Supreme Allied Commander after all, and why shouldn't he?
Yeah.
It's just to get as far as you possibly can before the rains come down, because then everyone will feel wretched and miserable, and you're making your life even harder. This is like Pete Reese driving on his infantry brigadier. You're exhausted now, but push on, because that will save the rivers of blood tomorrow and the next week and the week after, which they know because they've been through several monsoons since this war began. So I think that's what's really going on. But what's interesting about Dracula is originally there's a variety of it, which is actually going to go into the island of Phuket in Malaya called Operation Roger. This is then, they think, actually, no, this is just overextended and it's not really going to achieve very much. Let's just consolidate in Burma and taking Rangoon. So Dracula, as it was originally conceived, is kind of sort of is revived and announced on the 2nd of April that this is going to happen using 26th Indian Division, which has now been wrested from its Arakan operations,
Yeah.
and the British 2nd Division following, which had been obviously in 34 Corps for the Battle for Mandalay.
One peculiarity of Dracula is that Dracula is the nickname of Eric Down, who's the airborne specialist who was supplanted at 1st Airborne Division by Roy Urquhart and who was sent east to prepare for this operation. And it's his nickname because he looks like a vampire.
Fantastic. I love that.
Is that a coincidence or is that why they've called it
Well,
that?
because I think Dracula was visually put forward. No, it was only in the summer of 1944, wasn't it? But
Yeah. Well, and he's long gone from 1st Airborne by then. He's the man known as the most abrasive man in the British Army. That's his reputation.
which, as we know, is quite a claim, really.
That's quite a claim.
There's quite
isn't
a
it?
lot of abrasive characters.
But, I mean, one of the interesting things that also is going on at this point is it's clear that the Japanese are losing. So some people are now picking a side, aren't they?
Yeah. Including Aung San.
Well, it particularly Aung San, I think, and, for later resonance, I think this is very interesting, isn't it? So Aung San and his Burma National Army, in early January, let it be known that they're thinking of changing sides. And this is via the SOE in an operation called Nation.
British have learned, they've learned from, obviously, the Jedburghs, they've learned from Italy and all the rest of it, is that you don't want these irregulars running amok and doing their own thing. You need to control them on a fairly tight leash. And you can do that by sending liaison officers and saying, we'll arm you and we'll equip you and we'll make sure you're all right, but you have to do what we say. So here are these people doing it. So they then set up an SOE operation codenamed Nation, which is to liaise with the Burma National Army, the BNA, and leaderships of other groups. And the first parachute drop by the SOE is by an all Burma force under Chenpai Mint, which is dropped back on the 27th of January. And they report that urgent training is needed of the BNA troops. Well, no surprise there.
Right.
This is very much sort of part and parcel. This is where experience in Europe really does count in a way that Oliver Leese's experiences don't count.
Yeah.
And one of the people that's parachuted into Burma on the 20th of March is Major Tom Carew, who I knew and was absolutely delightful friend and is the father of a great mate of mine called Kegi Carew, who's also a writer.
Yes.
But he reports back that, within a week, he reckons that sort of BNA operations can start.
Right.
Slim recognised that Aung San might be a major headache after victory, but just does see the benefits. So
Yep.
He's come in from the cold.
He's come in from the cold. Well, and, that's what I'd do in his situation.
Yep. Yeah.
You don't want to be on the receiving end of the British Army at this point, do you? Or the Indian Army. And you want to be in on the liberation of Burma from the Japanese, which is the political side of that you want to find yourself on. So what are the conditions like? I mean, it's pre-monsoon, so you've storms. It's very, very humid. It's extreme heat. I was in Cambodia pre-monsoon last year, and the weather's disgusting.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the same
Hot,
latitude.
sticky.
Really, really sticky. And then when it does rain, you're soaked in an instant, and it's oppressive. And that obviously, this kind of atmospheric tumult makes flying more difficult, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And also, if you suddenly got a waterlogged airstrip, you can't, for all your bit hess, it's kind of not enough. And that then can affect supplies and that affects your speed. So, these are challenges which are starting to accumulate. And you can see why this sense of urgency is, everyone's tired. Big battles like Mandalay and Mictila, they take it out of divisions. And, it is still 17th Division and 5th Division and 7th Division, they're doing the running. So 30 Corps, for example, is given instructions to carry out what Slim calls Union Jack sweep. So the idea is you have a sort of a big rectangular area on the map and you sweep down diagonally, and then up and down the other side and, a bit like the shape of a Union Jack. And so 20th Division and 7th Divisions are pushing southwards down the Irrawaddy Valley with these sweeps and quite often, meeting fanatical resistance. Then 36th Division, your great uncle's division.
We'll come to in a later episode, yeah.
They're added to 30 Corps, and also the British 2nd Division is brought back as well. So meanwhile, on the 30th of March, Punch Cowan starts moving south with his 17th Division. So that's 63rd Brigade and 48th Brigade that we were talking about in the Mictila battle. And their big aim is to kind of sort of how are we going to get Piobwe, which is a significant town. It's where the battle of, where the Japanese had their headquarters for the Battle of Mictila, for example, about 25 miles south of Mictila, something like that. Again, there's a railway line. The railway runs through there. So it's an important nodal point. It's an important hub. And Cowan does the classic pincher. He does basically a mini version of Mictila, a Mandalay. So he sends 48th Division straight down, sort of south from Mictila, going down the main road there along the railway line. And he sends 63rd Brigade in a kind of wide arc with a battle group, which is called Claude Col. 2 squadrons of Probin's Horse, great friends of the show.
Yep.
2 squadrons of armoured cars, 1 self-propelled battery, They've got those now. 2 infantry battalions. You know, it is a classic Kampfgruppe, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's exactly what that is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they roll on. So it's a sort of thunder run, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the idea is to go in a sort of wide arc to the right and then sweep south of Pyorbui and then come up and attack from the south as 48th Brigade is attacking from the north. That's the plan.
They go through a bunch of villages. So Yindor, and there's 1,000 Japanese there. Yanaung, Yadwan, Yoden. I can't. How do you pronounce it?
Yawadon.
Yawadon, Sedwin, which is south of Pyorbui. And on the 9th of April, 48th Brigade, they take the airstrip north of Pyorbui on the 8th.
Yeah.
I mean, they're rolling on, aren't they? And by the 11th of April.
It's like 10 days after the end of the battle of Mktila.
Yeah, basically, they've destroyed the remnants of the Japanese 53rd Division, who by this point, all they have left is 2 anti-tank guns, 2 battalion guns, 33 grenade throwers, and a handful of machine guns. It's kind of interesting, this thing, because this is a Napoleonic War thing, isn't it? To say how many artillery pieces of the enemies you've seized as a way of showing how decisively you've won. And there's a flavour of that in this, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a bit.
Because it is a good measure of how deep the water the Japanese find themselves in now.
But just think of this, Al. These guys that, when do they cross? They cross the night of the 14th, 15th, don't they? Do you remember 7th Indian Division crosses, don't they? And 17th Division, Punch-Count 17th Division, then follow through 17th, 18th, something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So then they have until the end. So that's
February.
6 weeks of fighting, getting to Mktila and then fighting in Mktila. 6 weeks of combat every single day. Every day, those 2 brigades, and 99th, 63rd, 48th, 99th Brigade are in battle. And 63rd and 48th every single day. Now they're fighting again. So they have basically been on the go non-stop for 2 months in Burma in these conditions with supplies, more supplies than the Japanese, but still not as many supplies as you'd want in an ideal situation. And they're still going. Hats off to those guys. I mean, seriously.
Well, and against an enemy that insists on
fighting to the death.
And
giving no quarter, and none was given.
So the Japanese 18th Division, they pull out of Pyorbui because General Honda from 15th Army, he's finally gone, all right, we do need to trade space for time. We've got to get out of here. We're being overwhelmed. But obviously, there's vicious hand-to-hand fighting. The hallmark of all of this. The Germans, right? We've talked about why won't the Germans give up, haven't we, in Northwest Europe? But they do. It's the thing in the end.
You can be a British soldier in Italy or in Europe and barely see a living German soldier. That is possible to do that. It is not possible to do this for the Japanese. There is a point where a Japanese screaming at you will come charging at you at some point. You just will see them.
And if you want to read about that, again, George MacDonald Fraser really underlines that point.
Yes, and his book covers all this period, by the way.
Yeah, and he says something like, that guy running towards me with his sword didn't think that the war was over, didn't think that he'd lost.
Yeah.
By the time they've taken it, there's 2,000 Japanese dead in and around the town. And Slim says, for its size, Pyorbui was one of the most decisive battles of the Burma War. It shattered Honda's army, but it did more. It settled the fate of Rangoon.
I just feel somehow we're doing him a disservice. There's nothing wrong with the Brummie accent, by the way.
Jim, he's so dazzling, Slim, in lots of ways that maybe this is our way of
just taking him down a peg.
Well, no, not having to look directly into the eyes of the sun, Jim.
Yeah. Maybe that's it.
Making him human.
But these actions are just absolutely devastating the remnants of the Japanese 15th Army, who were already bad at the end of Mktila Mandalay. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, so by the 14th of April, which is, as you pointed out, that's 2 months after they cross on the 14th of February, don't they?
Yeah.
The first crossings are on the 14th of February. 18th Division is down to 3,100 men. 49th Division is down to 1,600 and 53rd Division down to 1,600 as well.
And when you add on the sort of, backroom staff, that means the entire 15th Army is 8,000 men, which is less than half the size of a normal division for an army.
Yeah. At this point, I would jack it in.
Yeah, me too.
But it's not an option, is it?
No.
I mean, what's amazing here is Slim has 312 miles to travel to Rangoon, and he's got 3 weeks.
Well, 3 weeks until Dracula.
Yeah, until Dracula. But the thing is the rate he's going, I think it must feel possible right now. We've talked about growing confidence, and we've talked about, even though they, as you pointed out, they are fighting in a difficult environment right at the end of the supply lines.
Yep.
They're very confident in what they can pull off with this tempo of operations.
Yeah.
So Slim urges 5th Division, who are spearheading 4 Corps advance, to head for Shuaimyo
Yep. 5th Division have now taken over from 17th Division from Punch County.
Yeah, because they're doing this leapfrogging thing that's part of how they've been doing stuff. And they get to Shwemio on the 16th of April, before Japanese suicide squads are dug in. But, I mean, amazing. By nightfall, the 4 Corps Vanguard are 240 miles from Rangoon. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Right, we need to take a quick break as we race to Rangoon.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love, starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
This episode is brought to you by San Pellegrino Ciao, a new kind of flavored sparkling water. The kind made with real fruit juice, a pinch of Sicilian salt, and the sparkle of the Italian sun. With no added sugar and just 10 or less calories per can, enjoy. With love, from Italy. By San Pellegrino Ciao now.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Will we get to Rangoon before Dracula?
Yeah, and then the next town they come to is Pienmana, which is bypassed because it's quite heavily defended. And, you know, there's an airfield at Lua, which is 10 miles further south, and that's quickly taken. And this is really important because it means that 5th Division can now be resupplied by air. So, you know, it's a classic thing. You know, it's all about airfields. And then the next dash is to Taungu, you know, which is where the Japanese, you know, Kimura intends to make his stand. But they want to get there. They want to hustle the Japanese before they can prepare the defenses and also, yet again, seize the airfield that's there. And then that can bring them to within range of Rangoon. So Slim is now told that Dracula is definitely going to be launched on the 2nd of May without any kind of, you know, it's set in stone now, which means that 4 Corps now have 11 days to travel 200 miles if they're going to sort of get there first and to get there ahead of 15 Corps, who are going to be spearheading the Dracula operation. So Slim now launches the Karen guerrillas on the Japanese as they're falling back to Taungu ahead of 4th Corps' arrival.
The Japanese, driving hard through the night down jungle roads to Taungu, ran into ambush after ambush. Bridges were blown ahead of them, their foraging parties massacred, their sentries stalked, their staff cars shot up.
You get this sense of chaos, don't you? This is a Japanese army that is absolutely run ragged, that is, you know, short of supplies, short of food, short of ammunition, no morale, and frankly just needs to. It is cruel, inhumane, insane to keep them fighting. You know, we've said this a number of times. You know, why do people surrender in a battle? You know, in medieval times or even more recent times, they do so because they haven't got enough supplies and they're not going to win. Yeah, this isn't the case here. There is this sort of maniacal win. That if only we can just hold a line before the one seed, and all will be okay. No, it won't. You know, just throw in the towel, no. But they don't, of course.
I mean, they're compromised on the front, they're compromised in their rear, they're
totally, yeah.
You know, and also Slim is entirely inside their decision loop, inside their thinking, and, you know, he's thinking 2 steps ahead and they're 5 steps behind at all times. So 5th Div, they get into Taungu on the 22nd of April, having covered 50 miles in 3 days.
Yes, and the reason they're able to do this is you know, because the Japanese are so screwed anyway, and because they've been ravaged by the current guerrillas on the way down, they're never able to make the stand that they're supposed to be making at Taungu. They just can't do it, you know. So
they're now 160 miles from Rangoon, and it's 10 days before Dracula. Yeah. And if they're doing 50 miles in 3 days, it's tantalizingly close, isn't it?
Yeah. But the odds would suggest they're not going to quite do it.
Yeah, well, yeah, but let's see.
They're running out of time on the 5th day to win the test match.
They received the surrender of 1st Division of Bose's INA, 150 officers and 3,000 men. So that's the Indian National Army are over. They're cooked.
Just explain to me why Subhas Chandra Bose is still so fated, why there's an international airport named after him in Kolkata.
Well, because
they did absolutely nothing and they all surrendered.
Everything changes after the end of the war.
Yeah.
It's politics, Jim. Everything can suddenly go into a mirror version of itself in an instant. And, leaving the British behind and redefining India in its own image. And that's how. I know, you like to fuss and russum about this. I'm kind of relaxed about it, really.
I just can't be. It just annoys me.
So on the 24th of April, 5th Division have clocked up another 20 miles. But this is the thing, though. This kind of momentum, this kind of tempo, they're knackered by this point. They're exhausted. The thing is, this kind of tempo, everyone ends up worn out. The gear starts to, things start to break down, and they're 140 miles from Rangoon, and they've got 7 days to go. Are they going to make it? It feels like they're running out of steam. 17th Division now leapfrogging.
Again, they're now in the lead once again for the first time since Pegu.
Yeah, and they reached Daiku on the 26th of April. They're 80 miles from Rangoon.
Come on, guys. You can do it.
Yeah, but here's the interesting thing. Finally, the penny is beginning to drop for General Kimura.
Crikey.
Well, I suppose, is he so afraid of his superiors, of delivering bad news? Is it that?
No, they're just all kind of so into it, aren't they? They're just sort of, it's a bit like Kassering and his oath to Hitler, isn't it? It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah. They're opting for death rather than dishonour, aren't they?
Yeah. There's no Karl Wolff.
No, there's not. There's no one.
No one reaching out to the Allies and circling back of an early peace opportunity.
That's right, beetling backwards and forwards between Ceylon and Rangoon. He's decided there's no point defending Rangoon. It's impossible. So we'll make a last-ditch stand at Pegu,
which is north of Rangoon.
Yeah, and hold on until the monsoon breaks. So hold them off Rangoon. That's pretty much ideal, isn't it, for Slim in this situation? And so 17th Division, they press on. There's minefields and suicide squads and more than 500 dead on the route south.
This is another road of bones. This is like the one leading out of Imphal.
Yeah.
They're dying because of disease and malnutrition and starvation. And, it's just horrific. Absolutely horrific. And they have
business.
Pretty stiff opposition north of Pegu, but then they reach the town at nightfall on the 27th of April. And this is a town which is on both sides of the Pegu River. Defenders either side, they're making a bit of a stand here. There is now a difficult choice because you can either have rations or you can have arms. There's only so much amount of supplies that can be brought forward. So Slim thinks, well, just got to get on with it. So we're going to have to put the men on quarter rations, not half rations, quarter rations. So he goes up to the front and to try and sort of G the men up. And he speaks to one gunner and he says, I'm sorry, you've got to do all this on half rations. And the gunner says,
don't you worry about that, sir. Put us on quarter rations, but give us the ammo and we'll get you into Rangoon. I mean, this is a heartily related tale, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. The marvellous spirit of 14th Army.
Exactly. The gunner's obviously thinking, well, if we get to Rangoon, this might stop.
Yeah.
And then we'll be all right.
What he didn't say was what he's muttering under his breath once Uncle Bill had walked away.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, God, here we go again.
I wanted a fag and a cup of tea.
Pegu, the Japanese has filled it with mines and booby traps, and it's cleared on the 2nd of May.
Yes.
Just as the monsoon hit.
Literally, the rain starts coming down that day.
Yeah, that's the day when Dracula's launched, of course.
Yeah.
But Rangoon has been abandoned. And isn't there the story of the aeroplane flying over Rangoon and on the roof of one of the buildings, some people have put Japs gone, get finger, extract digit.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. And Rangoon has been abandoned. Slim says on the evening of the 2nd, when news of the successful landing south of Rangoon and the Japanese evacuation had been received, 17th Division was halted in drenching rain, 41 miles by road from its goal. So Kimura had succeeded in stopping Slim get to Rangoon first by fighting at Pegu, but he's been destroyed, completely destroyed in the process.
So what? It doesn't really matter.
Well, places don't matter. It's destroying the enemy that matters. And
exactly that.
The Japanese used to understand that, but along the way they've forgotten it. There's a meanwhile, though, isn't there, Jim?
33 Corps, Stopford's 33 Corps, been doing a great job clearing the Irrawaddy Valley, and having a really tough time. I mean, plenty of Japanese defences there. Definitely monsoon hampers up the final mopping up operations. But, there's still huge fights at Alamyo and Karma, which is near Prome, between the 11th and the 15th of May. So, you've got this little pocket. Again, what are the Japanese doing? And afterwards, 33 Corps, they find another 1,400 Japanese dead. And the killing continues throughout May and on into June and July because those clearing up operations slow down inevitably with the monsoon and with tracks turning into mud and the rain going on. But, between in that time till, the end of July, a further 11,500 Japanese are killed in action and just 96 Anglo-Indians in that time.
Yeah.
And on the 28th of July, 28,000 Japanese troops of the 28th Army begin the long march into Siam, having broken out of the Sitang River Valley. And actually quite a skillful operation, it has to be said. And during that operation, 14th Army kill another 12,000 troops.
for the cost of 95 of their own men killed.
It's just they have been utterly destroyed.
Yeah.
Really reduced to kind of 10,000, 15,000 men. That's all that's left of the Burma Armour area.
The Sitang River Bend battle has shades of fillets, but without them escaping.
Well, again, it gives me kind of hope for the future, because I think, it'd be fun to do, be interesting to do an episode or two just on that alone. And any one of the Battle of Papuabwe is an epic, which we've told in very kind of brief terms here, just because this is, we're trying to give a big overview. But, so many of these battles deserve a proper reappreciation. In fact, actually, I'm very keen to get myself over there. So I think once we got over there, then we could be much better placed to.
Francis Tuker's involved in the battle.
Yes, he is. He's corps commander by then. Yeah.
Brought up to corps level. Yeah. Now, here's the thing, though. Obviously, we've talked about how, Slim is so dazzling, we dare not look him in the eye.
Yeah.
This isn't really what's going on at the time at all, is it?
It's just the scale of this victory, both at Imphal and now here at Mandalay and Mictila. It's obviously it's written about back home and people talk about this sort of stuff, but I don't think people really appreciate just how difficult it's been. What an amazing piece of generalship this has been. The vision, the foresight, the coordination, the detail, the make, do and mend, the fighting skill, the wherewithal to understand how you need to adapt your tactics for the different locations within Burma, the building up of morale, the control of malaria, the whole picture, the 360 degree in the round. This is why Slim is considered the greatest fighting general of the Second World War, and arguably, Britain has ever had. It is absolutely remarkable. But it's just, and you would have absolutely have thought that having brought off one of the greatest military achievements ever, let alone the current war, that Slim would immediately be feted, lionized, kind of put on the highest of pedestals. But it's not what happens. And what we're about to relate to you makes me feel sick to my core.
It's an absolutely amazing story.
It's a total freaking shower. And I'm ashamed of this. And needless to say, this is Lisa's doing. Not a friend of the show, I think it's fair to say. So Lisa's been feeling increasingly cut out of the loop. And on 3rd of May, so the day after Rangoon falls, Lisa visits Mountbatten in Kandy in Ceylon. Anyway, Mountbatten's not on peak form. He's just been recovering from dysentery. And Lee says, gosh, Bill's done a terrific job, but, he's been in the job a long time now. He must be absolutely exhausted. And I wonder whether, maybe it's time for his work is done. Let's get a new army commander in and give Bill a bit of a rest. And, I've been thinking that maybe Philip Christensen at 15 Corps is the man to oversee and maybe Slim can oversee the post-war administration of Burma. Mountbatten says, well, I don't really think so. I want Bill Slim staying where he is, but, I don't mind you carefully suggesting this to Slim if you want to. Sound him out. But Lease, because he's such a numbskull, flies over to sees this as green light. And he then does something even more unforgivable. He flies straight to Akyab first, because it's on the coast, rather than going to see Slim first. And he meets up with Christensen. And he says, right, Bill's stepping down. He's very tired. He's had a long time doing this. He's had this great victory, but it's time for some fresh raw. And I want you to command 14th Army. And Christensen, who gets on very, very well with Slim, says, oh, terrific. Well, sure. If Bill's fine with that, that's great. Lease then thinks, well, yes, because we're going to set up another army, which is going to be the occupying army of Burma, and we'll call this 12th Army, while 14th Army pushes down on into Malaya and all the rest of it. And so he says to Christensen that Slim's already left 14th Army. But he hasn't. He hasn't even spoken to Slim about this. So from Akyab, because it goes, geographically, it goes Ceylon, Kandy Ceylon in Sri Lanka, to Akyab, the Bay of Bengal, then to Mictila, where Slim's now got his TAC HQ. Slim thinks, oh, great, Lisa's coming, bring me some congrats. And Lee says, before we talk of anything else, I must tell you that I've decided to give Christensen command of the 14th Army. I don't consider you capable of planning large-scale amphibious operations, so I don't think it'd be fair to either 14th Army or yourself to leave you in charge of it. And Slim's resolute jaw kind of hits the floor. It's like, WTF?
Yeah. Well, although in person he sort of says, he says no, he rejects it.
Well, he rejects the offer of 12th Army, yeah.
With a sort of straight bat, doesn't he?
Yeah.
to Lisa's face, sort of off camera, he's like, oh, God, here we go again. I've dealt with this before. Because after all, he's had that whole business where Noel Irwin, 43, after the failure of the Arakan campaign, basically tries to say, it wasn't me, it was Slim who did this, and tries to pin it on Slim. So Slim's, with his staff, is sort of saying, no, don't worry, I've dealt with this before. But he must have been absolutely apoplectic.
Yeah, and it's clear he is. He absolutely is. And he knows this is jealousy, this is, Lease being crass. He knows this is politics and not performance. Lease then casually signals to Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff. He just says, was he Alan Brooke by this point?
I think he's Alan Brooke by this point.
Anyway, so he signals to Brooke and says that he's replaced Slim. Brooke is just absolutely gobsmacked.
Well, Jim, let's not forget the timing here. This is VE Day, around the end of the war in Europe, where Brooke's thinking everything's going absolutely brilliantly. We've defeated Germany. The last thing he wants
and
is
then this total numbskull has just gone and wrecked everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Another headache to sort out just at the point I don't need. So on the 9th of May, Slim tells his senior staff he'd been sacked, and then the news leaks out to the other ranks. And of course, they're incandescent about this for obvious reasons. Mountbatten, of course, is also outraged, and he's thinking, crikey, okay, I wasn't quite on the ball when I was speaking to Lee, so I should have been a bit more clear about this. And on the 14th of May, Brooke sends the bluntest of signals to Lease with a really severe reprimand, telling him that this is absolutely beyond his remit. How dare he do something like this? And also, coincidentally, the Auchinleck is in London at the time, who's Commander-in-Chief of India, and he is also dumbfounded. And on the 20th of May, Auchinleck tells Churchill that Slim is the finest general in Southeast Asia and recommends him as his successor as the CNC. And the long and short of it is the Lease is sacked, hooray, instead, and Slim takes his job. He becomes CNC of Allied Forces, Southeast Asia. And the tragedy for Christensen, who has done a fantastic job, is he's left high and dry because he's been tarnished, and Stopford is given 14th Army, and Dempsey is given 12th Army.
A terrible business, isn't it?
And that's a sort of sour note on the end of the Burma campaign. But the great thing is that history's forgotten it. Slim's reputation just grew and grew and grew afterwards, so much so that it's now, he's one of the 3 people to have a statue outside Ministry of Defence alongside Monty and Brooke. He is widely considered now one of the very greatest generals ever in British history. Yeah. And frankly, it's hard to argue with that. It's an astonishing turnaround from where they were. The vision that he has, the way he coordinates it, gels it, persuades, coerces, gets the best subordinates, reconfigures 14th Army, and turns it into this war-winning machine, I think is just testimony to that all-rounder vision that he's got as the master battlefield commander, the master of the strategic aim, the operational art, and the tactical pizzazz. It is the plaudits, the accolades of him are entirely justified. It's an astonishing achievement.
And the flexibility of the Indian Army to turn itself from, basically a colonial police force in 1939 to take on millions of volunteers and expand at a vast rate to get through its setbacks. I mean, this is often the story in the war that I think is the bit that leaves me, it's D-Day 4 years after Dunkirk. We're talking about 2 years after the Arakan offensive, that an organization, and yes, it's because of its leadership, but the fact it can generate leaders that can do this and then generate people who can work with a leader with this kind of vision and drive and ability. These are extraordinary organizations. And, there's a lot of talk now, isn't there, of resilience is a word that's being bandied around as sort of buzzword in defense chat. The Indian Army's resilience in the face of the defeat in Burma in the opening stages of the war most organizations would go, well, that's us done. We've got nothing. But the fact that they're able to turn themselves around, and yes, obviously, having the staff and the industrial base to be able to do it, but it's the people, the brains and the application, I think is truly remarkable. And across the world as well, because this, after all, this is the junior theatre. So I mean, of the 3 theatres, Northwest Europe, Mediterranean, and this is the junior. And yet they've still got the people and the resilience and the intellectual firepower, because a lot of it comes down to that, to turn this around.
Don't underestimate the fact that this is a multinational force, managing and organising and bringing together and gelling a multinational force is much harder than a single nation force, obviously. So you have that challenge as well. There's several books that we should recommend. I would recommend Louis Allen's magisterial book, Burma, the Longest War. It's hard work. We've read it so that you don't have to. But if you do want to read it, that is the kind of the big authority. There's also the 4 official histories of the war against Japan. I think they are in a sort of paperback reprint version these days, but you can still buy the originals on ABE Books. A War of Empires by Rob Lyman. We've talked about this a lot. It's excellent. I would also recommend Defeat into Victory by Slim, which is really good. There's various memoirs. Of course, the standout is George MacDonald Fraser's, which is exactly the spirit. But I've got to say, I found these twin series we've done on the Burma campaign, from the middle of 1943 right through to the middle of 1945, there's 2 years of war in Southeast Asia, in Burma. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I am totally in awe of every single person that fought in this campaign and what they achieved. And, and I think we should also, there should be a nod to the Japanese, because while the commanders were obviously cruel, hundreds of thousands of Japanese troops were flung to the lions in the cruelest possible way. And what they had to endure was out of all proportion to the hardships faced by 14th Army and 15th Corps, which is saying something, frankly. And it's a horror story. And it's also a horror story that in a country that is so beautiful and so lovely, that was so ravaged by war, and that it still is ravaged to this day. And many of the problems that emerged from the end of empire, the end of this war, this brief conquest by Japan, they're still being felt to this day. That's Burma, now Myanmar's tragedy. But gosh, what a fascinating story this is.
Well, thanks, Jim. We have one more episode for you in this series to follow, which is about the forgotten bit of the forgotten bit, the forgotten bit, what it's like in a wartime county battalion, the 10th Gloucesters. I'm sure you've all subscribed to the Apple Officer Class channel by now, if only to avoid the advert reads that we have to do. Maybe you're in a hurry and you want to get through these episodes quicker. Maybe you want to digest them all in one giant lump. I don't know, but that's one solution to that problem. Or maybe you want to subscribe to our Patreon, live casts every other Monday, ticket offers, that sort of thing, exclusive stuff with We Have Ways Fest in particular, which is the 12th to 14th of September. We don't like to do the hard sell on this podcast, but here it is anyway. That's wehavewaysfest.co.uk. We will see you there, we hope. Certainly, I've run into a lot of people in the last couple of weeks who I've managed to sort of persuade they really want to come. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks, Jim. Cheerio, everyone.
Cheerio.